Let me make sure I understand exactly what you're arguing. You started with an example from Senator Bayh, and I believe suggested that when Congress was criticized by one of its own, that's loyal opposition. And don't let me put words in your mouth on that. If that is an example, then I would argue that almost every congressional campaign in the country consists of loyal opposition, because a lot of members of Congress say, oh, Congress is terrible, please re-elect me so I can get back up there and straighten them out. Would that be loyal opposition, or have I taken that too far?
Loyal opposition is, if something is loyal opposition, no matter who's exercising it, it must contain integrity and the intent to improve government. And so whoever, whether it be parties, candidates, whoever exercises loyal opposition, if they demonstrate those values, then I would consider it to be loyal opposition.
In a February 21st article in 2009 appearing in the New York Times, columnist Sheryl Stolberg argues that loyal opposition is the quality of the party not in power to criticize the party in power without trying to overthrow the government. And basically what she's stating is that you don't have to say, okay, I'm going to oppose with this and then completely be disloyal. But if you have the intent on making government a better, more fair compromise, then loyal opposition is present.
You stated in your opening that factions are inevitable, but yet the Constitution doesn't provide for or mention the existence of political parties. What other evidence do you find in the structure of the Constitution itself for the support that the founders had for the idea of a loyal opposition?
Well, David Hume tells us that parties are inevitable because of a variation of interests, and since there is a very wide variation of interest throughout America, that's how the parties develop, which justifies their existence.
And in response to my partner, I think that David Hume is one of the better influences on the Constitution itself, because James Madison himself subscribed to David Hume's view. And also with the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, with the ability to express yourself and to speak freely, that of course brings about loyal opposition not only from Congress itself, but from the people.
Additionally, Supreme Court Justice nominee Robert Bork states that political speech is sacred, and the government works to protect our political speech through various voting amendments and allowing people to actually get out and express their opinion at the polls.
Looking back to the birth of our nation, you see that there was ultimately loyal opposition going back and forth between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists about the creation of the Constitution, looking to Federalist 84 and Federalist Farmer 16.
And James Madison, in creating the Constitution, foresaw loyal opposition and stated that parties and factions are an inevitable offspring of freedom, and therefore did account for it in the Constitution.
I want to examine your what sounds to be an intent test with respect to what is loyal opposition. And then you have to have integrity, and you have to have the intent to improve government. And so long as you have those two elements, you've got loyal opposition. How do you explain how would you characterize what's going on right now in Congress, which has been labeled gridlock?
Well, I think to go along with the definition that we've said earlier, if you're being truthful, completely truthful about what you are saying, then that is loyal opposition. But as seen with this healthcare bill, we've seen anything but loyal opposition. For example, Sarah Palin claimed that Barack Obama was trying to create death panels, which of course was not true. And even the last day of voting, when one representative shot a baby killer at Bart Stupak, or he claimed that it was against the bill itself, that is not loyal opposition, because not only he violated decorum as well.
Well, but if the standard is intent, what you've given us are examples of perhaps very bad tactics, but one might legitimately believe that the health care plan is a terrible piece of legislation for the future of the country and decide to oppose it. And what you may be then focusing on is how they have chosen to oppose it, rather than the fact that they have an honest belief that it's terrible legislation. How do you separate this out? I mean, strikes me that you've given us this, if we're really interested in figuring out what loyal opposition is, you just made our task extremely difficult.
I think we can look to Henry David Thoreau's basically his outline for using civil disobedience, because I think that's really analogous to loyal opposition. He says it has to be the last resort. So basically, you can't do this if there are other means diplomatically to get your point across, and it cannot incite violence, which I believe a lot of this Tea Party protest has done. You know, now we have death threats against our Speaker of the House. That's clearly not loyal opposition, and I think that loyal opposition needs to follow that guideline and decorum.
And for me, I mean, this is being an election year. For me, it was clear that both Republicans in the House and the Senate were worried about their re-election hopes. Representative Joseph Kauff from Louisiana was the lone House of Representative member to vote for the original House health care bill, but he since rescinded his vote because of pressure from both his constituents and other members of Congress. So I think that it was clear to me that they were not willing to compromise and were just trying to advance themselves politically.
And back to what you were stating, Judge, it is difficult to distinguish whether or not the person is creating loyal opposition simply to create loyal opposition or to actually improve government. And what you really have to look at is why they're doing it and the motives of what they're doing it for. Like if you look to the recent arguments about whether or not you should fill out the census, there are different factions that evolved, one being the Latino community, and another one was also viewed in Republican Michelle Bachmann, who is a representative from Minnesota, and what she stated was she would fill out one part of the census, but she didn't want to fill out any more because she felt the government was getting too big, and that was endangering the common good of the citizens.
You mentioned the First Amendment before, and we've talked about the politicians and we've talked about the people. Where do you think the press, which has its freedom guaranteed in the First Amendment, fits into the loyal opposition, if at all?
Well, I believe that the press is one of the greatest checks on the government because it provides a gateway between, it's a linkage institution, it provides a gateway between the people and our branches of Congress. And VOK states that anything outside the opinion dikes of the country is not going to pass. So I think going from, in 2008, President-elect Obama wanted universal health care, but because this was so outside the opinion dikes, as VOK would say, the health care bill came down a little bit from that.